The lone human ship continued to broadcast what it had seen as long as it possibly could. They would have made their way out of there if they possibly had the chance, but that glancing blow they took not only damaged certain components, but it completely perforated and annihilated key components necessary for their engines to operate. They were on emergency power, and their time was limited, and they knew it. But still, they used some of their power just to send the message. The video of what happened, the halfling ships desperately trying to land, trying extremely hard to load up as fast as they could and try to get away, and it didn't matter what happened, they were all taken down. Some of them loaded with nothing but women and children as they plummeted towards the planet in a fireball. The destroyer, though, put up a decent fight, fired with everything it could, but seemingly its weapons were either absorbed or refracted on the surface. They couldn't barely make a dent. And even though they tried, God help them, they tried. They could not save any of the cargo ships, and they couldn't even save themselves. As the last cargo ship was down, they could see the destroyer was desperate to get away from the planet, trying any way, shape, or form to get out of the line of fire, as it tried in vain to exit the gravity well and get far enough away where they could jump. But they just couldn't. As they tried to spin up their engines, they were shot from all different angles. It seems whatever these were knew that if they let this ship get away, there was a chance it would bring back their allies. What they didn't think of looking for was the fact that the ship they thought they had destroyed was only disabled. The videos continued. They tried to look as fast as they could as several large cities and large structures were destroyed. Some hydroelectric dams were just blown to pieces, causing areas to flood. But then it got worse. Distress calls were sent out, videos that were picked up of several of those on the ground trying desperately to stop what was going on, trying desperately to keep the new enemy at bay. They tried like hell to survive. But because they tried, and because they had the video, there was only a few quick frames worth of it, but you could finally see what they were facing. These things did not look biologic. They did not seem to be biological at all. In fact, they were almost completely synthetic. At least that's what they could see. The exterior of these things that walked on 4 legs came through with also 4 arms, but not the same as the 4-arm friends that we have. This seemed to put a small rift, but only for a moment, in the triad as they reviewed the video, as they compared the differences between what they could see between our foes and our allies. The foes walked on 4 legs. Our 4-arm friends did not. They were bipedal. Though both had 4 arms, it was clear that those who were synthetic had much more clear definition in their arms. Our 4-arm compatriots, though taller than humans, definitely taller, about 70% taller, were quite gangly, as humans would call them, thin, and didn't seem to have as much power as they would need. In fact, their bodies were more set up, when you break it down, to be more insectoid in nature, the way their musculature was set up, which is what kept them, though skinny, surprisingly strong. The synthetic ones, however, it was clear their musculature was more set up akin to human, different segmented muscles attached to the bone. Well, if they had bones, that is. But the main difference was in the body. Our 4-arm compatriots had a much more humanoid shape. The synthetic ones, it was simply a round, almost like a trash can, look to them. It was though this was a central processing unit, not given any show to aesthetics at all, It was not trying to be pleasing to the eye. In fact, it looked like a four-legged, four-armed turd going around. And the biggest difference between the two is that our four-armed compatriots had a head. These new things did not. It seems like the sensors were in the center of it, in the torso. There was no eyes that they could see, no ears or anything of that nature. Just a body with arms and legs as it moved forward. Two of the arms were fashioned with weapons. Most of these seemed to be energy weapons. Every once in a while you would see one with some sort of flamethrower, though seemingly not very effective as the distance was only about a meter. Humans seem to laugh at this, as flamethrowers that are used for recreation for humans throws flame far, far further than this. And as they reviewed the video, they could see that the flame was more of a fear tactic than anything else. It was used to flame into a room before they entered. It seemed as though they had some sort of tactics with them. They would use it to make everyone inside back up, as there is a primal fear of fire, a fear of being burned, but that did not stop anyone from holding position and firing like mad whenever these things came in. But halflings, being so small and not being able to hold high-caliber weapons, were not able to make much of a dent. Every once in a while, you would hear something of the radio screaming about, "They got one, they got one," usually followed by screeches of pain as they were ripped to pieces. The few video frames they had of one showed this, and everyone looked at the forearms and apologized for any phrases that might come out when they thought that maybe that the local population would assume that these were some sort of relatives of them, maybe some sort of offshoot, but it was clear that they were not. The forearms had a sadness in their eyes at the thought that they would be looked at as an enemy to their new friends. Humanity didn't care. Humanity only knew one thing: their new allies, their friends, but more importantly, when they broke it down, part of their family had been assaulted. Since humanity had reached out to the stars, the amount of children being born was fairly low. The only time it had spiked any was when they started to, shall we say, experiment with their new friends. Even though the biology didn't exactly sync up, there was new birth rates. This did surprise a few, but even though you're looking at a 0.001% chance of conception on a good day, it was still possible. And because of that, this is where the halflings and the forearms did not understand the humans' rage and the fact that they took this personal. Though they might have lost everyone on that ship that was monitoring because they could not get to them in time before their power just ran out, they looked over at their new allies with compassion. And then they looked over at the screen at their new enemies with sheer rage and hatred. A rage and hatred they had not seen in humanity since the first time they had met. And now they would see what humans do when they're truly, truly let free. Plans were made, everyone was drawn up, and fleets were readied. But first they had to retrieve their vessel. Their vessel they tried to reach, but it wasn't there. They couldn't figure out what was going on, and eventually they looked at one of the green moons that was within the sector. They checked, and sure enough, they received the slightest of response of a ping from a transponder, and humanity went down to that green moon, a jungle planet, which most everyone considered was going to be far too dangerous for them to colonize. The humans who landed looking for their compatriots were amazed by the fact that when they came up to them, everyone was sitting around a fire cooking up some sort of local fauna. And simply cut a piece off and said, "You guys hungry?" Everyone forgot that when it comes to humanity, it didn't matter if they had power or not. They always made the best of whatever the situation was. and the fact that most all of humanity was more than a little trained in survival tactics. In fact, it was becoming a pastime for most humanity to go to areas that would be, shall we say, hazardous to your health, and figure out how to survive without all the amenities that came with a heightened technology. And with this, humanity took a sigh of relief. Even though they did lose a few people, they did salvage some of their own. And the two others of the triad believed that this would quell the humans' rage a little. That is, until they sent their own fleets to the human fleet to join up. The forearms, still reeling from their own invasion and recovering of their own planet, only had a half a dozen ships at their disposal, but they did send what they could. The halflings, however, still had a pretty large force of approximately 50 combat vessels. These ranged anything from corvettes to destroyers. They didn't have anything bigger, but when they pulled into the rally point, they saw something amazing. They saw that humanity was not pulling any punches. Humanity was going to send everything. Humanity's war fleet was there. Their flagship led the way. The refit ship that they had captured was there, but now it wasn't alone. Another ship almost as large as itself was there, but it was a completely human design from bow to stern, and it was clearly designed specifically for one thing: to kick Xeno ass. And with that, they received their orders from humanity. "We will take point," they told their friends. "We have the biggest guns, we have the biggest ships. We need you all in the second and third lines. We will give you the coordinates of when to jump in the FTL space, or you can wait until our third and fourth line is going to rip a hole in time space and you can follow us through. Be warned, you have to be within a certain area or the vortex is going to cut your ship in half. We will give your helmsmen all the details they need, but if you wish to jump in FTL space instead of following us, then by all means. But you're going to have to time this just right." They all looked confused at this, but the humans continued explaining how they were going to jump in and just start wailing on the enemy. They were not going to sue for peace. They were not going to ask for a response. If they received any sort of call from them, they might answer. But humanity had seen these things rip halflings apart, and halflings were not that strong to begin with. Though strong for their own kind and strong for their size, they weren't nearly that powerful. They were simply powerful from their numbers and the fact that they were great ship commanders. Normally, without using any type of pride to get in their way, they are extremely dangerous. But now, humanity would be their sword, would be their shield, because again, they were now family. The other two members, the halflings and the forearms, did not fully understand this, as they looked at humanity as still a separate species, but most humans simply smiled at this, and then went back to work. Within just a few planetary rotations, everyone was ready to go. They knew that the ship itself would be able to jump in close and be able to rain all sorts of holy hellfire, but they wanted the planet. It doesn't make sense to destroy a planet to win a battle when you want the technology that's there. Humanity's primary goal was, of course, to secure everything. The secondary goal was to get the technology that was there as to integrate it into their own. And they would want this, and it turns out they would need this. As the fleet folded space and opened up their portal to jump through, using the quantum singularity to go into the new space, the other races were simply amazed at this as they sat idling by next to the ships that they were going to follow in the next few hours. What they did not see after the portal itself closed was that the human ship simply went across the equator, went to the east and west, and looped around the planet. If an enemy ship was within range, they did not give any sort of warning. They simply raised their turrets, adjusted, and fired. To their absolute amazement, the energy weapons did not penetrate the enemy hull. They either reflected, or were absorbed in them. Seemingly, this made the ship move faster. The enemy ship would move faster and faster, getting closer the more it was hit. It seemed as though they had found a way to absorb energy weapons into their hull with some sort of plating that humanity had not figured out yet. This made humanity want it even more, but they still wanted blood a whole lot more. And as the ships got closer, a few broke off so they could land on the planet, sending a whole bunch of pods down, all of them armed to the teeth and ready to start beating some of these headless bastards into the ground. In space, the large ships got in formation, and instead of continuing to fire to give the enemy more energy, they said, okay, can't use power? Not a problem. They adjusted to a separate set of turrets and began to use kinetic weaponry, and this proved to be unbelievably effective. They did not use the point defense cannons with these tiny little bitty slugs, as that wouldn't be any useful to anything in space, really, unless you were point blank. You would need to focus fire on these to be able to punch through the ship to do any sort of damage. No. They used the rods from hell. These rods were approximately 1 meter in diameter and 25 meters long. They would launch them through coil guns at a speed that almost dwarfed that of energy weapons, and they would pierce the enemy ships stem to stern, completely skewering them. It didn't take more than a handful of shots to realize exactly where the engine compartment was. They couldn't figure out where the bridge was to try and take that out to spare the engines, but it didn't matter. The gunners and the crews began to fire wholeheartedly at them, and they saw that a few of the smaller ships began to turn and try and make distance as they were trying to escape the gravity well enough to jump to their own FTL speed. But humanity realized that this was a bad idea. Even if they did send out an SOS to whatever in the hell they came from, it didn't matter. They were going to treat these folks with the same wonderful care that they gave the humans' own allies. And they began to fire without regard to ammo expenditure. They didn't care. Torpedoes, missiles, railguns, coil guns, anything that was ballistic was fired out into the void. Even what they used for planet-based artillery was turned and fired in their direction. The resulting explosions would rip the hull apart of one of these alien vessels and cause it to go adrift. And the whole battle lasted only 21 minutes. At least in space. It would be another 4 minutes before the second line ships were able to jump in, but they would have, saying an easier time about it would be a nice thing, considering there was nothing else left to shoot at them. The human fleet began to move into position to give their folks on the ground more support if they needed some sort of supporting fire, some sort of artillery, or they needed a drop of supplies. They would be easily in position to do so, and to do so very quickly. Though those on the ground did ask for more ammo, they did not ask for more personnel. They locked into a few of the video cameras attached to the suits, and yes, as humanity went, it came to find out that those with 4 arms and 4 legs were actually shorter than humanity themselves. Those humans in their suits would jump up and land on them, crushing them down. It was clear to see that as soon as humanity's soldiers reached in with their hands and ripped open the torso, there was nothing biological inside, except for the fact that it was a type of mechanical organic material that it was made out of. They did find a strange sphere that they found out it was some sort of CPU of some sort. after several of these were simply ripped out and crushed as humanity soldiers hold them up above their head as though holding a heart above their head of their sworn enemy and screaming in rage as they took their vengeance out on these mechanical monstrosities. They were ordered not to destroy them all, as those of higher rank wanted something to be brought home for research. Though they were not going to bring anything back to Earth. It would be researched close by. They still watched as the soldiers of humanity continued their entire vengeance across, and every single time one of the humans came across a torn apart halfling, you could hear it in their voice, the anger swelling up, and no fucks were given after that. Especially when they went to a school looking for survivors, and I don't have to tell you what they found, or the parts of what they found strewn all over the walls, the floor, the ceiling. At that point, the picture of that made its rounds across to all the chains of command, and they simply gave one simple order. Kill them all. And they gladly did. The halflings tried to send down their own soldiers in shuttles, but they couldn't get to the front lines fast enough as humanity foregoed their weapons, actually tossed them to the side, and began to go hand to hand with these things. These things may have had energy weapons, but they were not strong enough to get through the synthetic suits that they wore. It simply burned a small piece of the suit itself, but it wasn't strong enough to get through the entire plating. Every time it hit a weak point, a human would yelp in pain, but it did not get through the interior of the suit, as that was designed specifically to stop energy weapons, as that is what they had been facing ever since they had reached the outside of their own cradle world. And with that, the battle was over, and humanity could now salvage what was left of their new enemy. And what they found when they ripped open the ships amazed everyone. Not only were the ships some sort of mechanical, organic something they couldn't figure out, but the entire hull was designed to siphon not only energy weapons, but it seems as though they were designed specifically to use some sort of cosmic radiation, anything that came off of a star, and siphon it into the engines. That was their fuel source. Instead of using quantum energy like humanity does, they're basically solar powered. What the hell? Humanity as a whole didn't understand why one would do this. The only reason you would want to do this is to wrap a star and create a Dyson sphere, which now they had the ability to do if they wanted to. Maybe not a sphere, but a swarm. But why would they? They already have enough energy. They don't need to do anything that extreme. Looking at the soldiers, they realized that these were simple drones. And it wasn't long till they realized that it was a drone fleet itself. But what amazed them the most is when they were finally able to plug into one of those strange spheres, not from one of those soldiers on the ground, no, but one of the CPUs from the ship, that they had struck the engine and blown the engine to itty bitty pieces. But when they did, it finally spoke to them. But it only spoke in a strange typing effect. It was strange to hear it just going. And it took the translator a long time to figure out what it was saying. Eventually, it came down to some sort of binary code, but with a twist. It was not two-dimensional. It was actually a trifecta, which surprised the living crap out of everyone. They were able to figure this out, and that was the way they made these computers. They were actually learning computers. They plied the computer with questions, but it was hesitant to give them any answers. Not until it was shut down several times and told that it would be shut down permanently if it didn't answer. For some reason, This biocomputer began to show a type of fear and began to start spitting out all the information it had, where the enemy had come from and why they were there, why they wanted that planet. Well, it turns out that those that had created them were considered the only ones in the universe. And this was not only an assault fleet, but this was a mining fleet. Those creatures that they sent, the four-legged and four-armed ones that they faced, were actually not just an assault force, but they were also going to be used as worker bots. That's the reason why they had four limbs on the top and bottom, for stability's sake. That way, if need be, they could simply flip over and use their stronger appendages in one area. They didn't have any concept of up or down unless gravity was attached to it. They would work great in space, as they would simply be able to use thrust vectoring to be able to move in different directions, to be able to carve up different asteroids for materials. For some reason, they wanted this planet. There was a certain type of ore in the planet that they wanted inside the mantle itself. Humanity looked, and sure enough, it was the exact type of ore that created the core of their technology. No wonder they wanted it so bad. But this also came with a question. If this was just a simple mining group, where was their fleet? Did they have a fleet? If they believed they were alone, would they have a military? Were they like us? What did they look like? The machine couldn't give an answer. It told humanity that it was brought online just as the ships were departing. It did not know what their masters actually looked like. It didn't even know where the master's home planet was. They were supposed to bring everything back to a space station. When looking at the schematics, the space station was massive. It was about the size of humanity's moon Luna. This made everyone very nervous, because if they were able to make a space station that large, what would stop them from making ships 10 times larger and easily able to crack a planet in half with a single shot? This was the first time that the Triad got very nervous. Humanity was a little more calm, as they realized they understood this technology far better than they wanted to let on. They realized what it would take to actually do what everyone else feared. One of the commanders spoke out to the entire Triad, "Do not worry, we are here, and humanity protects its own." One of the halflings spoke up, a counselor, one of the direct lines to the Empress. "How can you say that? We are not even the same species. How can you say that we are your own?" With that, the human seemed to grin a little bit, and then, remembering his professional veneer, put his face back to stone and stated, "You were willing to fight alongside us. Yes?" "Yes? Well, I do not understand." "We have brought this up not only to our four-armed compatriots here, but to your own folks as well. And you seem to not want to understand it. Those who spill their blood with us shall be our brothers. Not only has our genetic code started to integrate with yours at a very low level." He let this pause for a moment, as this seemed to be a bit of contention among the halflings, as only two of their own have been able to either sire or give birth to a mixed breed with a human. "But because of that, you're now part of humanity. And because of that, you're with us." The halflings seemed a little bit more put back. The four-arms, though, had a big grin on their face as they realized this. The fertility rates with humans were even worse for them, but it didn't stop them from trying a lot. In actuality, that was their trade, their main focus of trade with the humans. But it didn't stop things from getting more interesting. more interesting in the fact that now they had a entire universal coalition. They had the triad with 3 different species, but now the 3 species did not have to worry about going to battle with each other because nothing brings people together faster than a common enemy. And because of this, the triad would now become stronger. Now that they had secured the planet, they kept one of the flagships right there. One of these dreadnoughts would always be above the planet, as they knew that the enemy would eventually come to try and retake the planet. There would also be a battle group associated with them that would reach out even farther. Farther, as they would reach out into the stars in the direction in which they believed that the enemy's base was, and they would try to find it. Using quantum entanglement, they would be able to send back instantaneous messages, or maybe delayed by a few moments, to let everyone know where the enemy might be. With this information, everyone got to work. Though the numbers on both sides outside of humanity were low, they immediately went to a wartime footing. They had to understand this from the humans as they realized that they had to adjust their industry more from things like agrarian nature to military. Because of that, each of them had to change the way they think. The Empress of the Halflings was constantly worried about this, as she worried that her own society would change so much that she might be deposed, but they had an enemy to deal with before she would have to worry about that. She did on many occasions try desperately to get humans to integrate into her family. However, she was constantly stopped on this. Main reason as the humans did not want to show favoritism to one side or the other. And a good thing too, because as though the triad was strong and did have a common enemy, the peace was still tenuous at best. The forearms were still mad at the halflings for entering their planet, and the halflings were still mad that they were unable to take down humanity. So tensions were still high. But tensions would remain high for over 2 human years as they all prepared. In that time, humanity built at least one more of their dreadnoughts, along with a whole bunch of other smaller ships, mostly in battleship and cruiser classes. However, the amount of destroyers and frigates could not be underestimated. Many of the technologies that they found from the enemies were used to almost fully automate these ships, leaving each of the destroyers with a crew of 7. 7 personnel was all that was needed, as several of the ships were simply full of automated bots that did most of the maintenance, most of the rearming, and most of the cooking even. This allowed humanity, even though its numbers had not plussed up enough to really take on an enemy as large as they were facing, it allowed them to increase everything 20 to 30 fold. The halflings were hesitant to do this as they still had a staggeringly large population. However, the forearms realized that with their limited population, they would require such things to help them out. However, they definitely kept all the automation away from their planet. Anything that was of alien origin, if it didn't come directly from the humans, they didn't trust it. Well, from the humans or their own folks. But they were still trying to recover. But eventually, they would get the call. A simple call that changed everything for the foreseeable future. 2 words from the frigate over the stars. Found 'em!